All right, so we have two sets of images here. Some of you chose to do a street portrait, street photography, and we'll talk about those second, but just quickly, what we're looking for in street photography is a combination of elements in your scene. And we want that combination to be kind of unexpected. And that combination can only occur because of where you're standing as a photographer and how you're combining the different elements of the scene. We'll talk more about that as we get more into the street photography, but first we'll look at these environmental portraits. And the goal of an environmental portrait is, one, to inform us of the subject, to show us who the subject is and tell us something about them. But hopefully within that, we can also find a connection to the subject, not just see them as an individual that is separate from us, but find our place in connecting with them. So just as an example from my other class, because I teach two sections of this, here we have a portrait of a subject, but the environment that they used was just greenery. It's not telling us any more about the subject. It's not as though this woman is in her hiking clothes and she's out in the forest on a hike. This person was just placed in this green area. So we know this isn't an environment that's telling us more about the subject. On the flip side, we have this image. This is a great example of an environmental portrait. This is by Lauren. And we are at ISO 100, 18 millimeters. That 18 millimeters is important because that allows us to see a lot more space in the room. We're able to see almost to the edge of the bed, the cupboard over here, the dresser over here. So we're able to see a good distance in the room. She's at f10, which gives us enough depth of field in the frame. And you're at 0.3 seconds. And that's my only real critique of this image, is that 0.3 seconds. I don't think your subject is totally still. Her hands look sharp as those are still, but her face looks like there's probably just a slight bit of motion happening there. Now, what's working really well in this image is the combination of different elements. So we have the bedspread is orange, her shirt is orange, her hair is red, and then the lights in the background are all warm. So there's a visual cohesion within this. And there's a softness about this. The blanket, the bedspread, the decorations in the background have this natural feel to them, the plant coming down here. But that has the flip side of it as these rigid areas, right? So the bookshelf is very exact and rigid back there. The frame is, the dresser is. And I think that kind of shows us two sides of her personality, like the warm, nurturing side. And if she's a NICU nurse, and we can kind of get that from here, but you told us that, there's a rigidness about her. There's like an exact way that things have to be done. So both sides of that, the warmth and nurturing side of her and that like on point rigidness, have to be combined. And I think that's shown well with this image. You also have beautiful light on your subject. It looks like you have an open window. I'm guessing that because we could probably bring down the highlight on the bed a little bit, maybe put in a little bit of a diffuser so it's not such a bright point in the room. But the light coming across her is really beautiful. If you had set up lights, I assume that they would be more on her and not on the edge of the bed. That's what I was talking about, the edge of the bed. But the light on her is really beautiful, softer light that illuminates her and gives dimension to her. So great image here. Those two little things I would correct would be the shutter speed, having it faster, and diffusing a little bit of that light as it comes down. I don't think anything's getting blown out based on the histogram, no. But it's getting pretty bright there at the bottom. This image is by ZinZIn, and we have your mother in the frame, and she's looking up at her plant. And just like we saw in Lauren's image, there's a bit of rigidness here as you have this like perfectly composed image with the frame here of the window that has this harshness, and then the softness of this tree. And then your mother's figure, she's down at the bottom looking up at it. Looking at your settings, your ISO is pretty high here at 1000, so I would pull that down. And your mom can hold still for longer than 1/50th of a second, so as long as you're on a tripod, you would be able to capture this with a lower ISO. Now, you're shooting with a Mark IV, so lucky you. Probably the digital noise, we can see it, especially you can see it back there, but it's not nearly as bad as it would be with a different camera. So you have a little bit of leeway there. Also, as I'm looking at this a little bit closer now, I'm wondering, yeah, looks like it just needs to be straightened up just a hair there. But when we have these really exact edges, right, we want to make sure that everything is totally lined up. The light on your mother here is really beautiful. You have this soft light. Probably she's between two buildings and the light's reflecting back and forth, so you don't have the harsh light. There's a really strong blue color cast to this image, and you can see the difference between this and this. So if this was shot, I think you said after sunset, we would expect the quality or the temperature of the light to be warmer, where here it's definitely on the cooler side of things. Here it's just cleaner light. And if you come back, if you were to go into the develop module and look at these numbers right here, you can see that it's really heavily weighted towards the blue. You can see that where it should be pure white, or where it should be black, that there's more weight in the blue. So we know this is a color cast issue. And that's why I would encourage you to change your white balance to auto when you're photographing outdoors. And then here, if you had a color cast and it's after sunset, it would be a warmer color cast instead of a cooler color cast, which I think would work better. But this is one of your strongest images, that juxtaposition of the shapes and the plant. Your mother, the light on your mother is just beautiful, and her interaction with the tree lets us know that this is about her like adoration for the plants and how she takes care of her plants. In a similar type of image, we have this from Kassandra, who's I think lives with her grandma, and her grandma also, I think you called her the crazy plant lady, is very interested in taking care of her plants around the house. You're at ISO 100, 28 millimeters, f4 at 1/200th of a second. Those settings all look good. Again, this light, just like we've seen in the last three images, is really pleasing light. It's softer light, open shade. We can see it's bright in the background, but it's more open shade coming on her face. I wonder even if you had turned her to face the light a little bit more so you could have more of that light coming across her face and having the plants more in the background, or if there's a plant, it sounds like she has a lot, so that where she could still be set up like this, but they would be like on the side, like where I am as the viewer, and having her face out towards the light more, and photograph it from the outside. Hopefully I'm making sense with that for you. But are we learning about your grandmother? Here we are. She seems like this is like a regular thing for her to do. We can see each individual plant here. We can see her walking around with the water can, watering each of them. I also think there's a nice environment here, looking back and seeing that this looks like a condo complex. That gives us a sense of place, of what's going on here and how she's making this space homey for her.